In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make a needle felted fox. My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So we're going to be going into part one of today's tutorial in a moment, and in this part of the tutorial we're going to be looking at how you make the armature for the fox and how you wrap it so you've got that lovely fox-like quality when your sculpture is finished. So let's have a look at the materials you're going to need. Right, so materials wise, you're going to need some core wool. So I've got a white Shetland wool bats here, and I've got about 44 grams of it because you're going to need a reasonable amount to make the core of your fox. I've also got some black wool bats, and this is just a merino wool bats, but you can use Corriedale or any other kind of wool bats if you want to. And this, I've got about 6 grams. You don't need loads of it. This is just for the hands and the feet and making the nose and the eyes later on. But it's a nice, easy wool to work with. And then finally, I've got about 40 grams of this merino wool bats in like a fox red colour as well. And we're going to use this for obviously the external of our fox, so his tail and his body and everything else. In addition to that, I've also got 3 floristry wires. These are 12 inches and they are 22 gauge in thickness. And I just picked these up on eBay, so they're really easy to come by. Tools wise, I've got my needle felting mat, which is what you'll definitely need for making your sculpture. And then I've also got a selection of needles. So I've got my fine twisted needles in my needle felting pen. I've also got some medium twisted needles in my needle felting pen as well. And that's going to be for working on the core of our fox. I've got an extra fine needle, and this is a twisted needle as well, for doing more of the detail, so his eyes and his mouth later on. You can see there it's lovely and extra fine. And then I've also got a medium twisted cross needle as well, and this is for doing more of the work that needs a bit more of a felt to it, so not quite as detailed, but I just need a single needle. I've also got my wire cutters, my embroidery scissors, some needle felting wax, which is a bit grubby and very well used. Then I've got my brush mat and my 7 needle multi-tool. And I've just got 7 triangular needles in there. So let's crack on with the tutorial. The first thing we need to do with this tutorial is make an armature for our fox. Now I actually have a video on this that I made a little while ago, so if you want to look at how to make an armature in more detail, then please watch that. But the first thing you need to do is take one of your floral wires and we're just going to fold it in half so the 2 ends meet at the bottom. I'm just going to place my finger just in between the middle bit just to help me get a bit of tension there, and then I'm just going to squeeze it tight so they're in half like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to twist this, and I'm going to twist it so it's anywhere between 1 inch and just over 1 inch in length. So that's about right there. And then I'm going to take my second floristry wire and do the same thing. So get the ends to meet, pinch and pull in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this second wire over the front of the first wire that I twisted, so it's almost like it's wearing a bit of a Superman cape and it's kind of flying off in the wind. What I'm going to do then is just make life a bit easy for myself by splaying out these back wires here, and I'm going to twist this wire over this back wire 4 times. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then the same on the other side, keeping it nice and tight. 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'm going to pull these back bits behind it now, and we're going to place one over the top of the other, so we're creating like a triangular shape, and it's going to be about just over 1 inch in length. So I reckon about there is probably about right, and we're just going to twist those again, and we're going to go for 6 twists. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. There we go. So our torso, this is going to be our torso, is measuring at the moment about, well, exactly 2 inches. And then our head, I'll just measure that for you, is exactly 1 inch. What about that? What a guess. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to trim our legs and our arms to get them around about the right size. So the thing you need to bear in mind with this sculpture is you're going to have a tail coming out, and the tail's going to be quite thick, and that can have a real impact on the balance in your fox standing, because if the tail is bigger and thicker than the legs, then you're going to run into problems with getting it to stand eventually. Trust me, I've been there. So what we want to do is make our legs a lot longer, and I want him to be quite long anyway. So I'm going to make his legs about here. So I'm just going to bend that wire upwards. I'm just going to measure that for you so you know how long it is. So at the bend, his leg is about 2.5 inches. Yeah, about 2.5 inches in length. So once it's bent, what I want to do is I'm just going to trim that off with my wire cutters at the bend. Ooh, it's a bit long. There we are. And then I'm just going to fold up these ends here so we don't have any sharp wires poking out when our sculpture is finished later. Just making sure that they're both even, because you don't want uneven legs, because then that's also going to have an impact on his balance. Just unfold that one, not quite as much as that. There we go, that's pretty good. Now what we can do is we can think about how long we want his arms to be. It's always important to do the legs first because the legs give us a guide for how long we want our arms to be. If we do our arms first, what you'll find is they'll either be too short or they'll be too long if you haven't already trimmed his legs. So let's have a look. So we have to bear in mind that we're probably going to lose a lot of this length when we add the wool later. So I'm going to put his arms around about here. Okay, so I'm just going to get the bend around about the same on the other side. It's a bit too long. Like that. I'm just going to measure that one for you. So that is measuring nearly 3 inches, probably about 2 inches and 3/4. And just use your eye as a bit of a guide, really. Okay, so I'm just going to trim off the excess. I'm just going to do the same thing as before. I'm just going to fold up that sharp edge about 0.5 centimetre, so we don't have any sharp edges once our fox is finished. No one's going to spike themselves on a naughty wire. There we go. Perfecto. Right, so we want to add his tail next. So I'm going to take my last wire, I'm going to fold it in half again, and I'm just going to trim that down the middle. What I'm going to do then is just hold out his body so it's like this. And I'm going to place my wire at the top end of where we started twisting his torso, so just below this triangular piece here, and I'm just going to fold that over. I'm going to hold it with my left hand, keeping it nice and firm, and then I'm very tightly going to wrap this piece all the way down the torso, keeping it nice and tight so it can't unravel until it meets between the legs. Okay, and then I'm just going to bend that end up like so. There we go. So we've got our legs and our tail and our arms and head in place. So what we want to do now is start wrapping our armature. So I've got my needle felting wax here, and I'm just going to cover the entire skeleton in my needle felting wax. And this is different to just a normal beeswax because it's got a lot more stick to it. So this is a really great thing to use because it really stops the slip of the wool when you're wrapping wool around a wire armature like this. If you're using something like pipe cleaners, it's not so difficult because you've got the fabric on the pipe cleaners to help you, or the fibres to help you get the wool to stick. But when you're using floristry wire or any other kind of wire without any fibres along the end, along the sides, it just makes life a lot easier for you, especially on these very fine wires here. So just give it a good rub. And it's different to beeswax, this wax, because it has other ingredients in it to give it a bit more stick. If you just use beeswax, you probably wouldn't get the same effect. But I sell it in my Etsy shop, Little Bushka. If anybody would like to get their hands on some, I can pop a link down below as well if you want to have a look. But there's lots of places in America as well that sell needle felting wax. I know Serafina Fibre Arts, she makes her own and she sells all sorts of different waxes, so she's worth looking at if you're new to needle felting and you don't know where to get bits and pieces. Okay, so I've covered my armature in wax now, so the next thing I want to do is get my black wool bats. So here we are, and I've got a section here, I'm just gonna pull away this bit here because it's making everything look a bit uneven. And I'm just gonna tease it out so it's all looking around about the same. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this wispy end here, don't want that. And I'm going to pull this in half. So I've got roughly 2 halves of the black wool bats here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap his hands. So I'm just going to take my first piece of wool bats and I'm going to take with my nail, I'm just going to scrape it along my felting wax, which is looking particularly grubby. And I'm just going to give it a rub between my fingers, okay? And that's my right hand, my dominant hand that I'm doing that with. Then I'm going to take my wool and I'm going to take my armature. I'm going to place my armature over the top of the wool. So I've got about anywhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch of kind of fluffy ends kind of exposed. I'm going to hold that with my left hand. I'm going to start about halfway up the arm and I'm just going to twist this really tightly. And I'm using my thumb and my finger with the wax on just to rub against the wool as I twist it to help give it some stick. I'm going to take it about 1/2 centimetre past the end of the wire and then I'm going to go back up. Okay, like so. I'm going to pull away that excess and then I'm just going to twist that last piece around the arm. There we go. And there we go, that's the first hand done. So let's go in with the second one. So again, a little bit more wax. And this just means you don't have to felt against the wire, which can be quite tricky, especially if you're new to needle felting, by using the wax. So it just helps the wool to stay in place and not unravel. So again, placing the armature over my wool, holding this with my left hand, keeping it nice and taut, and then just rolling it. Making sure that your wool's not twisting as well. You don't want it to twist over like this because then you'll end up with lots of lumps and bumps. Just make sure you're keeping your wool nice and flat and untwisted. Taking it again about 1/2 centimetre past the hand or past the wire and back up. Keeping it as taut as you can. Pulling away that excess. And then just twisting that end bit up the arm like so. There we are. So we've got 2 arms that are wrapped and they're pretty even. They look pretty symmetrical. So what we want to do next is we want to wrap our feet. So we're going to go back to our wool bats. I've got my piece here and I'm just going to again pull this in half. So I've got 2 halves like this. Just going to tease this one out so it's a little bit longer. So when I tease, I pull very gently. You don't want to pull too hard because what will happen is then you'll end up pulling off the wool. So you just want to tease very gently. So you're stretching the wool out if it's a bit too thick or clumped together. Okay, so I've got this nice long piece of wool now. I'm going to go back to my wax, get some of it on my fingers. And this time I'm going to start probably about 1/3 of the way up my leg, placing the armature over my wool. And then I'm just going to wrap all the way down past the foot or past the wire, again about 1/2 centimetre, then back up. Move, if you've got any issues with wire getting in the way, just move it out the way. It's really robust, so it's not a problem to just push it out the way. Then back, down, 3rd time, and then back up a 4th time because we want to make these a little bit thicker. And I'm just going to go up the leg a little bit just to keep some of that thickness kind of graduating, and then I'm just going to pull that away. I'm just going to twist that excess around the rest of it until it disappears. There we go. So that's the first foot done. So I'm just going to do the second foot with the second piece. So I've got my 2 legs wrapped there and I've got my arms wrapped. The next thing we want to do is we want to take our white Shetland wool bats. So I've got my white Shetland wool bats here and I'm going to pull a strip away. This time, rather than pulling it this way, I'm going to take a strip going with the fibres, or how the fibres are falling. So I'm just going to pull it away like that. I've got a nice long piece here and that is measuring 14 inches and it is 1 inch in width. So what we're going to do here is we're going to wrap our torso. So once again, I'm going to place my armature over the wool And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to have about 2 inches of excess wool here that I'm just going to take with my left hand and pull down between his legs. And that's just going to help me to anchor this down whilst I wrap the wool around the rest of the body. So whilst I'm holding this with my left hand, I'm going to start twisting it around the torso. So it might be that you have to use your hand like this and then pull it tight because of the way the armature is. And I'm going to go all the way up to what will be his chest area. And then once we reach the top of his shoulders, I'm going to take my wool and I'm going to bring it over to this shoulder here, like so. Okay. And then I'm going to wrap it again around the chest, so around the front. And as we get around the back, I'm going to bring it around the second shoulder, the shoulder nearest to you. Then I'm going to wrap it again. And I'm going to bring it back over to the shoulder furthest away. Wrap it round again. And then bring it back over the shoulder closest to us. And then I'm just going to take the rest and wrap it back down the body until we get to the very end. And then I'm just going to twist this. I'm just going to go around the legs and the tail just to kind of anchor it all down so it doesn't come undone. There we go. So our body has now been wrapped. So the next thing we want to do is wrap our head, tail and arms. So I'm going to go back to my white Gotland core wool. I'm going to take another strip. This time we're going to wrap our head. So again, this is measuring roughly about the same as the previous piece for the torso, about 13 inches. I'm going to place my wire armature over the top of the wool. I'm going to anchor this down. I'm going to hold it over the shoulder this time. I'm going to move that arm out the way. And then I'm going to wrap this really tightly, making sure it doesn't twist again. Around the head, past the wire, back down. And I'm going to go for a few turns now. 1, 2, 3, down the bottom. And then I'm going to bring it back up to the top and then bring it back down again. 1, 2, bring it back up. So you're creating almost kind of like a cone shape. So it's tapering off at the top and then you've got this thicker bit down the bottom. And I've just made it like this, nice and thick, so we can anchor our additional pieces that we're going to add to the head later on. So it doesn't really serve any other purpose than that at the moment, but you want it to be quite thick so that you're not going to be hitting wire when you're felting things down in a moment. Right, let's do his arms next. So I've got my lovely fox coloured wool bats here. So I'm again going to take a strip away. So you want a piece, so I've got a piece here that is measuring 9 inches by 1 inch. I'm going to pull that apart again. So I've got 2 equal pieces. It's really important now that we get this looking as even and equal as possible because we're going to see this when the armature is finished, okay? Because this is going to be for his arms. So I'm going to go back to my wax. I'm going to take a bit more wax on my nail here. I'm going to place my armature over my wool. I've got about 1.5 inches here that's just kind of hanging out to anchor it down. And I'm going to twist this wool over our arm all the way down past the black until we've got about 1 centimetre of the black exposed for his hand. And then once we've done that, we're going to go back up all the way to the top of the arm. And then once you reach the top of the arm, you might want to just go down again about 1 inch and then back up again just to start making this a bit thicker like you would on the top of an arm. The top of the arm is always larger than the wrist and hand part of the arm, isn't it? So there we go, that's that one done. So let's go to the second one. I'm just going to hold him upside down this time, just purely for ease for myself, just because it's the opposite side. I'm going to hold that down against his chest this time, and then I'm just going to, again, turn that round, keeping it nice and taut. It's really important that we try and get the arms looking as symmetrical as possible, because there's nothing worse than unequal arms. It just looks like you might have some kind of cellulitis or something like that. So we want to get them looking the same, as close to the same as possible. Okay, that's looking pretty good. We haven't finished with the arms. We are going to add more wool to the arms later on, but for the time being, we're going to leave those so they're wrapped. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap our tail. So I'm going back to my wool bats now, and I'm going to take off a strip. The longer you can get this strip, the better, because we're going to go for quite a few wraps here. So the piece I'm using is measuring 14 inches, and it's about 1 inch in width. So again, I'm just going to get a bit more of that wax, and we're going to build this up because a foxtail is nice and bushy and full. So we want to create more volume at the top and then have it taper down towards the end. So I'm just going to place my wool underneath my wire, and I'm just going to start wrapping. And just use your non-dominant hand to hold everything in place as you wrap with your right, making sure, because it's long, this has got a lot of potential to twist over itself or twist around. So just be cautious of that and make sure that you just keep checking it. And then again, once we get to this end part here, the end of the wire, I'm just going to take it past the end of the wire. Okay, and then bring it back down. And then just keep wrapping this. It's a bit thicker here. I'm just going to tease it out a bit so it's a bit more even. And I'm just going to take it back to the top, all the way to the base of the tail, as far as you can go, and then I'm just going to, again, just wrap it a few more times, just towards the top end, going down about 1 inch and then going back up again, just to start creating that volume. And then this end here, where I'm pulling it nice and tightly, I'm just going to wrap this between where the body is and the tail starts, and it kind of locks it into place. So that's my first wrap of the tail. So I'm going to go in with a second piece. Again, I'm just going to hold this down over the top of the tail, and then with my left hand hold everything down. And you should find that now you've got that first piece added, that adding the second piece is a lot easier because your wool can actually grab onto the wool you've already added to the tail. Go all the way down to the bottom, and then really, as I'm doing it, I'm kind of pulling it upwards as well. So it's kind of being pulled on an angle. I'm just going to fold some more of this down into that area where there's a bit of a gap. Then I'm just going to take my needles and I'm just going to felt that down to stop that from unraveling. And because you've got quite a lot of thick wool here, it should be quite easy to do, but just go in tentatively, just felt down the sides. Don't felt right down the middle, because then you'll end up hitting wire and you'll break your needles. So don't do that. You're just going down the sides just to felt that down into place. Okay, so that's pretty good. And I'm going to add another 2 layers of wool to this now using the same technique I've just shown you. So I'll be back in a second once they're added. Right, so I've added another 2 layers of 13-inch wool bat strips to the tail. So I've got something that looks like this now. So this is what you're aiming for. This isn't the final finished tail. Obviously, we're going to add the fox-coloured wool to this as well. And that's going to add additional thickness too. But that's enough for the moment, just so we've got enough to felt into when we're adding our colour later. The very final thing to do is add some core wool to the thighs of our legs, because we want to get those a bit thicker too. So I'm going to go back to my wool. I'm going to pull off some more strips. So I've got a piece here, another 13-inch piece, and I'm just going to pull this in half, going with the fibres, separated very easily. And then that first piece, I'm just going to place right at the very top of my leg. And I'm just going to use the torso and the tail that I've just added to kind of hold it against those ends. And then I'm just going to wrap this down our leg, taking it past the black. So we've got, again, about a centimetre, maybe just over a centimetre of that black wool exposed that we added earlier. All the way up to the top. And back down. Take it back a bit further. Back up. All the way to the top. And then just wrap it a few times, those ends, around the top part of our leg. And then I'm just going to felt that down. And then the same thing with the other side. Okay, so I've done the same thing to the other leg. What we want to do next is we want to add some of our fox coloured wool to our legs as well, because we want to have that in place before we start adding in the rest of the body, just so it integrates nicely once our fox is finished. So I'm going to get some of my fox wool. So I've got a nice strip and I'm just going to pull that in half. And this is about 9 inches in length, this piece. And I'm just going to do the same process that I did with the white wool, wrapping it round our leg. All the way down to the bottom, back up, getting rid of those ends. And then I'm just going to felt that into position so it can't unravel. We can add more of this wool later, but I just want to get the initial colour onto the leg because it just makes life easier for us later when we're integrating everything together. Okay, so that's the first leg. Also, what you will find, if you're naughty like me and you don't clean your mat very often, when you hold your leg down and you start felting, if you felt too deeply, you'll end up with the fibres from previous felts showing up on your fox. So it's really important to just go in lightly with your needles, not go too heavy-handed, and that way you stop that from happening. Okay, so let's do the other leg. Right, so part 1 of our tutorial is finished. So in this part, we've made our wire armature, we've waxed it, and we've started wrapping our core wool around it to create more shape and bulk to our fox. We've also added our feet and hands using the black wool bats, and then we've also started adding that fox colour in as well to the arms and the feet, just so that when we start adding the bulk of the body later on in part 2 of the tutorial, everything is nicely integrated. So I hope you found that useful. Please share this with anyone else who you think might be interested in starting to take up needle felting, or anyone who's looking for a good fox tutorial to follow. I will see you tomorrow with part 2 of our fox tutorial. See you then. Bye.